Hello and welcome to Business Standard Dialogue. It's a webinar series that we host every week. This is the third in this series. And on diverse subjects, every week we go into geopolitics to business to economy, everything we deal with. Today's subject is E25, a hurdle for automakers. Now, the important thing is there is a question mark after that. Is it a hurdle for automakers? If yes, how and why? That our panel will talk about. I am your host, Nivedita Mookerji, and I'll go over to the panel to introduce them. Mr. Arun Malhotra, an auto expert and former MD of Nissan India. Welcome to the show, Mr. Malhotra.
Thank you.
Mr. Puneet Gupta, Director Mobility S&P Global. Welcome to the show, Mr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Me. Yeah.
And Mr. Deepak Patel from Business Standard, he writes on automobile and aviation. He's our in-house expert, you can say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we can begin with you, Deepak. Can you just, break it down for the viewers and for all of us? What exactly are we talking about? What is this animal really, E25? And there is confusion because we are talking about E80, E100, lot many E's. So in just a couple of lines, if you can sum up.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So I will briefly give an idea about what is going on here. So there are two sets of discussions happening between stakeholders. So two sets of discussions are happening by the government with all the stakeholders, automakers including. One is about transitioning from mandatory E20 fuel to E25. This is mandatory. Right now in India, if you go to a petrol pump, you get E20 blended fuel. What is an E20 blended fuel? It's a 20% ethanol mixed with 80% of petrol. This is E20. Why has the government made it mandatory and why we have reached here? Because ethanol is produced locally and it reduces India's import dependence. India imports a huge amount of crude oil for its needs, and that's why it has started blending ethanol in it. Ethanol is domestically produced. The E20 is right now mandatory, and now the Indian government is discussing with automakers on how we can transition from E20 to E25. Now, this is one set of discussion happening, and we are talking about mandatory. Means if you go to a petrol pump right now, this is E20. You will get E20 only, and whether this should be shifted to E25. The other discussion that is happening is about flex fuel vehicles and flex fuel itself. Right now, if you go to petrol pump, you will not be getting flex fuel. Now, what is a flex fuel? Flex fuel, as per government's definition under the new CAFE draft, is E85 or E100, which is basically 85% ethanol mixed with 15% petrol or just pure ethanol. That is considered as flex fuel. Now, this is a second set of discussion happening where the government is looking or basically exhorting automakers to launch flex fuel vehicles, basically cars or two-wheelers that can absorb and handle E85 or E800 fuel. And they're also exhorting and talking with oil marketing companies so that they can start providing E85 or E800 at all the pumps, all the retail outlets across. So these are two separate discussions. Today, we are primarily talking about E25, transitioning from E20 to E25.
Right. Thanks, Deepak, for simplifying things. Now we'll go over to the expert, the first expert, Mr. Malhotra. Can you please come in and tell our audience why is it required?
I think
why is E25 really required?
From the government perspective, required is with the West Asia war, the fuel prices going up from something $85-90 a barrel to 117. And we do import about 90% of petrol. To that extent, it's an outflow for exchange. Our rupee currency also devaluing against the dollar. So clearly, it's putting a stress on the economy. And we have ethanol. We have the capacity to produce ethanol. And internationally, I would say in Brazil, there is a concept where a lot of vehicles run on ethanol. So government is trying to raise the bar. from E20 to E25. So clearly the objective is that you save foreign exchange, you save costs, and that's the objective of the government. And these are the two basic objectives. But I think the basic challenge, which Deepak mentioned, is what is the government thinking? Then you look at what the industry thinking. And third point is, which is most important, is what is the customer thinking? So you need to combine all three stakeholders and industry associations and testing agencies. So it's not simply what government says to manufacturer. There are many more stakeholders in it.
Right. Mr. Gupta, there are many more stakeholders in it. What is the government thinking? What is the industry thinking? And what is in it for customers? So who is the real beneficiary here if E25 is to come?
Yeah, so Nivedita, if we see a picture from the top, so it's clear that 2-3 years back. So when we talk about ethanol, which is obviously a part of energy, so energy transition was primarily because of because to reduce emissions, right? But today, after this Middle East crisis, so clearly the aim is energy transition because of energy security, right? And that is what Arun San and Deepak talked about, why exactly government is too much worried, and really want to use this crisis as an opportunity, to really reduce their dependence, on import of fuel. So one thing is very clear. So obviously, when we talk about, incorporating E20 or E25 or maybe going forward E85 as a fuel, so it's a win-win for the entire ecosystem, right? It's not just for consumers, so it's also for the government of India, which is obviously will be a win, because obviously we will be reducing imports. And from a consumer perspective, one thing is he gets a good option, because obviously if E25, or let us say going forward FFE comes, so obviously it will come with a lot of incentives from the government. And obviously Arun San talked about Brazil. So in Brazil, what happens, there is a 70 rule, right? So what is the 70 rule is that ethanol is just priced at almost 70% of the gasoline price, so which makes your running cost very cheap, right, relative to a pure gasoline. So now, in coming few weeks, we may see that this rule may be implemented in India also, because right now, yeah, there may be some ethanol supply issues, but going forward, we'll see this rule getting implemented, and ethanol being priced at almost 70% of the gasoline price. So then, it's a win-win, because in India, the customer is quite running cost sensitive, and typically in A and B segments, where we have players like Japanese players like Maruti Suzuki, so clearly, or maybe Tata Motors, so most of them have one flex fuel, which is a flex fuel vehicle, which is ready. But obviously this comes, because there are costs involved in it. But today, I think specifically after this Middle East crisis, Iran crisis, I think government is in the full mood, to get it implemented in India.
Right. Deepak, what are you picking up from your sources in the government? How quickly can it be implemented?
So, ma'am, when we talk about transitioning from E20 to E25 mandatory, which is a mandatory fuel, I think it may happen quite soon, because the structure and the system is already in place. If the government wants to, basically, all the government has to do is to basically start procuring ethanol a bit more and mixing it up with the existing. So basically, what I mean to say is that the system is already in place, and if the government wants, it can be implemented, probably in the next few months or in the next couple of quarters, next few quarters.
So it can be in 2026 itself.
Yeah, it can be done. The thing is that there are a lot of discussion happening and a lot of concerns also with what the automakers have put forward during discussions, informal discussions or formal discussions with the government and government officials, where they've talked about what is going to be the impact of E25 on vehicles that are old, and especially older than, let's say, that have been bought or manufactured before 2023 or 2022. Because as per manufacturers, testing has not been done on them, how they will react or how they will behave. These vehicles have fairly been working quite well with E20. That they have also told the government that they have not got any major complaints or any problems, major problems from the customers when it comes to these vehicles handling E20 till now. But they want that some testing should be done on a proper basis, on a sizable basis, so that before it can be before it is made compulsory across the country.
Okay, Mr. Malhotra, what is the big concern of the industry? The biggest concern, if you have to name one?
See, I have to concern. When I take industry, I'll take the customer also, because customer forums have been, there was a lot of heat and light generated when more heat when E20 was introduced. One concern which is logical, which is very clear, is that there's a fuel efficiency drop that nobody denies. The figure may vary from 4% to 10%, but approximately the figure is 6% on E20 fuel. So if you go on E25, the fuel efficiency of the vehicle will go down by 7 to 8%, which has already gone down by 4 to 5%. Second, which was mentioned by Puneet, when E20 was introduced, there was no reduction in the price of fuel. So you got a vehicle, you got a fuel which had lower density, lower real output, but the price remained the same. So it's like if one side is gaining, but the customer is not gaining. So that's one part which needs to be addressed. And I see a problem here today because there is already a price, fuel price, which increase is expected anywhere around the corner. Where LPG has gone up, other things have gone up. Now, what can happen is, one side you have a fuel price going up, and other side there's expectation that in E20 there was no drop. So that is one element. So why should the gain, the benefit not be passed to customer? People are saying that I have to, my fuel capacity or my fuel tank capacity in real terms goes down. The second concern, which was discussed a lot at that point of time, was that there is these vehicles before 2023 were not tuned for E20. So there is this report of the government that we have tested out, no feedback, negative has come, but the doubts are lingered. And I have not seen any formal official report till date that we tested 800,000 vehicles, we tried them over this thing, we tested on E20 fuel, nothing happened. Although there's no negative report. So sometimes they say the perception is more real than reality. So people who have older vehicles, they believe whenever they have a problem in the vehicle, whether it's in pickup, start, or maybe not having the right momentum, they always feel it is because it's happening on E20 fuel. So I think what is important is, if you have done your tests and if you've done this part of it, you should clearly lay down the report with data, information to everybody. The third part is the E20 was introduced in April 26, April 25. Why such a rush to go to E25? I would say, why not go to E30? Because ultimately, if you go on going in these pieces 5, there's another debate, another concern, and customers and manufacturers are wary that if it affects the performance, most vehicles have warranty periods of 3 to 5 years. So they are covered, but vehicles which are beyond warranty. So I think you need more transparency, more clarity, and more sharing of information. And don't rush it overnight. Have all the information ready and then take a day. If this is there, we come upfront. That's the way I look at it.
Thanks. Mr. Gupta, which are the government departments involved in this consultation process, if there is one? Is the government consulting with the industry, or is it going alone?
Yeah, so as I said, so this has to do with the entire ecosystem, because one thing which is very important is because it has to do with ethanol supplies, right? And currently, if you see, ethanol supplies are around 17 a billion liters, in India. And roughly out of that, even if you see 80% throughput, so it comes to around 13, 14 billion liter. And out of that, 2.5 billion liter is being used for beverages. And then 11 billion liter is rest out for transport, right? So now problem is that, one thing is that if you move it to E25, so you need more ethanol. right? So obviously the department, the oil marketing companies, the Ministry of Oil, so this aspect of the ministries are involved, because obviously, if there is no supply of ethanol, then there's no mean talking about E25, E30, or even going forward. And currently, as Deepak said, this is possible, this year, because if we increase the throughput to 90%, because it is an industrial asset, so there is a possibility to take it to 90%. So if government can take it, the ethanol production to 90%, then obviously, we will be able to serve, or E25 as a fuel, right? Point number one, right? So point number two is that again, this is not just about, making ethanol. It's also about the input feed, which is sugar cane, or which is grains, which may be corn, right? So now problem is that we had last two very good monsoons in India. So already now we are expecting that maybe, going forward this year, one of the crops, maybe, because there may be lower monsoons, right? So, or there may, because of the super El Nino impact, right? So there may be definitely, crisis around food, so food inflation already is expected to go up towards the end of the year because of this. So now, if you don't have the input feed, then even your 90% efficiency is also not possible, right? So clearly, when you see, so then from the automotive industry side, your vehicles also, like, what Mr. Arun was saying, that your vehicle also need to be validated for E25, right? Or E30, whatever the government plans to bring it. So there, you have agencies like MORTH, or testing agencies like, ARAI, primarily who test the engines, right? Because so at the end of the day, it is not just one or two agencies, with the help of whom you can implement it. So even, why I said oil marketing companies to begin with, because even your dispensing stations needs to be ready for it, because obviously there is a more corrosion element. You add more ethanol being more hygroscopic, right? So tendency to absorb more moisture from the environment. So obviously, you need to be ready. Your even petrol pumps need to be ready, because this is a big hurdle going forward. And then on the other side, OEMs also need to take certain burden, because it is not possible, because there are lot many fuel systems or fuel parts like fuel pipes, or fuel pumps, or maybe you're even impacting engines, so to the extent of, pistons, or your, piston rings. So there can be impact on multiple parts, so there may be some or somewhere, more wear and tear or more corrosion happening, and maybe OEMs may also have to bear a little bit burden. So, because this can be a part of, you can say a validation. But overall, it is not just one agency or one ministry which can manage it. It is the entire ecosystem which needs to work, right? But the good part is that, we have already seen that E20 was planned for 2030, but government was able to prepone it to 2025, 5 years ahead of the time. So similarly, because, government, has been, we have seen, very proactive and have been working across different ministries, in tandem. So it's very possible that E25 may be a very, maybe a possibility very, very soon.
Right. Deepak, I'll come to the journalist to ask who will be the real winner in this if it is implemented, and who will be the biggest loser?
Well, the biggest winner, so as Arun sir and Puneet sir, they both talked about, the input. So how does it actually function on ground is that at a certain MSP, at a minimum support price, ethanol manufacturers buy either sugarcane or, rice or whatever input they use. And at that, I don't think rice is MSP, probably Puneet sir can clarify, but at least sugarcane, I know that they have to buy at a minimum price, and then it is put into production, and then ethanol is produced, and then it is provided to oil marketing companies that ultimately mix it with petrol and then provide it at the retail outlets. Retail outlets means the petrol pumps. Um, so if as long as one of the biggest beneficiaries of, as ethanol production in India has gone up, has been the farmer. We have to say this, that, um, we can talk about, there are other aspects to it, whether India should be producing, sugarcane or not. That's a separate discussion altogether. But as long as a certain section of the crop is being procured by ethanol manufacturers from farmers, it is farmers are going to be benefited because it's an assured supply. The ethanol manufacturer has to run the plant, he will be buying sugarcane or whatever input he has to take. So one of the biggest beneficiaries is, of course, the farmers. Then we have ethanol manufacturers, and there is which I would agree with the government also on this part, that there is a very strong angle of having not being import dependent on the fuel source. If India is moving towards ethanol, India's dependence on crude oil, which India imports almost 85% of it, will of course reduce. When we talk about losers, I think Arun sir already mentioned about it. The biggest concern is from the consumers. When I say consumers, in this case, I'm talking about the car owners, vehicle owners, who are concerned about what's going to happen to their mileage, to their efficiency, what will happen to their warranties, and what will happen to their vehicles. How will their vehicles react? There is corrosive aspect that Puneet sir also talked about. So again, these are the concerns. So I will not say losers, but yeah, one of the biggest concerns is coming from the vehicle owners.
Mr. Malhotra, you spoke about the need for testing, and one shouldn't rush into it. Where is the rush to go from E20 to E25 so soon? What about the compatibility issue, and will there be a price rise for car buyers?
So one is, as Deepak even mentioned and Puneet even mentioned, nobody can doubt the government's intention and the objective. I think what is basically could have been better is a more long-range planning. Irrespective of the crisis in the Middle East, this was a direction already. So once you start with E20, you talk of E25 and E30 at that point of time and prepare everybody, all the stakeholders, whether it's manufacturers or other things. The other thing which I think Puneet mentioned clearly is that are we really, is the supply side, at the moment it looks comfortable, but is the supply side so comfortable at this point of time? Because the moment you go from E20 to 25, it's a 25% jump in terms of ethanol. I mean, 20 to 25, 5 or 20, 25%. And I don't think it should stop at E25. It has to go further. So I think the government needs to take a more long-range stand and say, okay, we are talking E30. Then you have enough time for testing, enough time for manufacturers to make changes in their plastic parts, seals, and other things. So that is something which is required at this point of time. Now, with regard to fuel price hike, the problem today is going to be, even if the government decides to somewhat relatively reduce the price, because that was a move last year, that why were the prices not reduced? But at this point juncture, we are talking of increasing the prices. So the decrease is getting mixed with the increase. So that's a constituency government has to see. As far as farmers are concerned, sugar farmers, you have to look at the price, what it was and what it can give. At the moment, it's still a small component. But I think that's a long-term journey. So I would say this E20 to E40 or E80, we're talking flex fuel, this whole journey must be planned out, communicated, discussed. So all the stakeholders are clear how it is happening. And as I said, more transparency. You say these government agencies have done this testing, but people are saying, where are those reports? Which vehicles are they tested on? So, it's still a very, it's a difficult, it's not a very politically correct question to ask, but that's a question which people in customers' mind, where it is tested, might be. And if you talk to experts, they say, if a vehicle can run E20, there is no reason why it cannot run E25. So I don't think the concern is that much on E20 to 25. But the concerns of the E20 were dating, and ideally, I don't think we have to stop at E25. We need to go further also. That's where the journey is.
Right. Mr. Malhotra, I was asking about impact of this on car prices. Do you think car prices will...
No, car prices will not vary, because car prices, see, the big change will happen when you are coming to flex fuel vehicles. There is where a lot of changes will be required. I don't think we E20 to E25 car prices will take any. There might be small components that you replace, and as Puneet mentioned, the manufacturer and the existing customer has to take some pay. But I don't think in terms of design or of the vehicle or anything, any prices will go up at this point in time.
So,
I would like to jump in
between.
Yeah,
sure.
The point that Arun sir mentioned about communication, I think this is going to be a critical point when it comes to either transitioning from mandatory E20 to E25 or to, developing a flex fuel vehicle policy. Because we saw last year, see, the vehicle owners, especially car buyers, they are a very aware lot. They research a lot, they read a lot before taking a decision.
Deepak,
So, yeah, am I
there is an
audible?
audio problem, Deepak. You, yeah,
Am I
it's better
audible
now.
now?
Yes.
You're audible.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah, so ma'am,
Yes.
what I was saying is that this point of communication is going to be the most critical point. How it is communicated, this transition, the government is planning from E20 to E25, and of course, as Arun sir mentioned, it should be long range. Customers need to be made aware that okay, we are moving this way over the next, let's say, 10 years. How we will be going from mandatory E20 to E25. Government and automakers also need to make customers aware that what is going to be the impact on their vehicle and how they're going to deal with it. How will the government deal with it? How will the automakers deal with it? So yeah, I just wanted to
Right.
put this point
Right,
across.
Mr. Right. Yeah, thanks. Mr. Gupta, coming to you, do you think the various wings of the government, are they hearing what the concerns are? So many things being introduced one after the other. How is the industry coping? How will the consumers coping? So, what do you think is going to happen then?
Yeah. So I think all the partners in the ecosystem or all the ministries, are working together. So point number one, right? But I think the issue is that there needs to be a long-term planning. I take a very small example, little away from ethanol, right? So for example, when diesel came to India way back, 2008, right, 9. So it really went well, right? But then when the foreign global players, for example, like Honda, came with the diesel around 2000, I think 17 or something like that. So I think by that time the government changed their policy, right? And Honda really had a huge losses, and they really lost their trust in the Indian market at that time. So basically, when Indian players, though, were able to do good in diesel, it may be Tata's, it may be Maruti Suzuki, right? So they really, capitalize on it, or maybe Mahindra's, right? So similarly, when it comes to the new age fuels, right, or we are talking about now fuel agnostic approach or multi fuels, right? So then clearly, government needs to lay a long-term roadmap, which can be decade or maybe 15 years, right? So that we also, so that, the global players are also a part of this growth. We can't, because obviously we have seen, being in S&P Global Mobility, that Indian players generally are more aggressive in terms of decision making, right? Because they are local, their leaders are local, right? But when it comes to the global players, so they need some more time to convince their global parent companies, to really invest as per the India new regulations. And by the time it happens, the policy is old, right? Or policy is being tweaked. So I think it is very important, because even if you see last month Wahan numbers, so what exactly is happening, that Indian origin OEMs, so their market share is going up, and the market share of rest all global OEMs, it may be Koreans, it may be Europeans, or Japanese. So I'm including Maruti Suzuki in Japanese here, right? So all of their market share is reducing. So though it is good for India because our overall sale is going good, our Indian players are doing good, but we definitely need more investment from global players. If India as the auto industry has to grow, because if global players comes in, the export, the tendency to export, an opportunity to export grows, right? So they bring in more technology, they're more supply partners. So I think we need to see, that somewhere, basically we feel, that this is something which is missing in India. I think one of the greatest example is that first April 2027, we have to come up with Cafe 3, right? And still Cafe 3 is not 100% finalized, right? So maybe there is a draft, right? So it is almost finalized, we can say, but still, 100% draft is not available. Maybe Indian companies are already prepared for it, but then, I think global players really need more concrete, roadmap or plans or policies, to really invest in India. So I really see this as a bottleneck to the growth. And same way ethanol, so if you see ethanol players like Toyota, players like Hyundai, so Brazil today is almost 95% of the industry runs on flex fuels, right? And there are all global players who are a part of this growth in Brazil, and maybe in India also they can be very active. But problem is that because let us say the incentives are not very clear, like on flex fuel vehicles, for example, will government give any incentives in future? Maybe yes, right? Because otherwise it will be very difficult to push flex fuel vehicles, because on every flex fuel vehicle there is a cost involved from the OEM side, which is almost equivalent to 40,000 Indian rupees, right? So unless or until government doesn't give some kind of benefit in terms of GST reduction, so it will be an add-on cost for the price-sensitive customers, who may plan to buy ethanol going forward. So I think what we are seeing is obviously in terms of partnering between the government and India ministries and government, hearing the consumer issues. So I think all of that is in place somewhere, right? But we need to be more structured, in our approach.
We'll take some questions. We have a question coming from Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya. He's the editorial director of Business Standard. AKB, you have a question?
My question is for actually Mr. Malhotra. He made a very important point, and this was about why the customer should not get the benefit of use of ethanol in petrol. So hypothetically, at the E20 level, what should have been the price benefit of petrol used and sold by the oil companies? Any rough idea on that?
So I'll take a very simple, I don't have the exact figures. There is a general understanding that the fuel efficiency of E20 vehicles, because E20 fuel have gone down by 4 to 5%. So effectively that 4 to 5% has to be compensated in the price. Then you are on a level playing field. Then anything you give above that, 2%, 3%, that's a sweetener and a bonus. So that's a very simple way of looking at it that could have been done. And it can be done on that formula approach. Because one is you bring it, if I'm getting a fuel efficiency of 20, suppose I'm getting a fuel efficiency of 50 and there's a drop of 5%, then it comes to 2.5%. So approximately you have to give that 3% advantage and you have to give 1 or 2% more. So that's as far as is concerned. But I think one issue which still remains is of the older vehicles, because there the question is not only of fuel efficiency. How do you satisfy those customers, and what do manufacturers will play that your vehicles will cover them in repair or something which is there, or some small kits or changes are made. So that's a different concern which cannot be, the government cannot do at this point of time through the fuel price side.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Ashokji, I can add a certain, numbers to it. So, I think if we see, maybe just extending what Arun San said, right, that calorific value of gasoline is around 32 megajoules per liter. Whereas if you talk about ethanol, that is roughly around 24, 25. So it's a gap of around 25%, for the customer, because you are mixing two fuels. One fuel is having less energy, which is 25 megajoules, and another fuel is gasoline, which is having more energy, right? So we are paying for gasoline, right? We are not paying for less energy fuel. And 20% of your fuel is actually having less energy, which is 25 megajoules, right? So now when you mix these, so obviously the mixed fuel, E20, will have a lesser energy. So which is roughly 25%. So ideally, from my perspective, the ethanol pricing should be less by around 25 to 30%. So obviously, since we are mixing 20%, so which boils down to 5%, which Arun San said, right? So that's the back-end statistics behind it.
So a 5% decrease would essentially mean prices coming down from in Delhi price from 94 rupees to around 90.
That's right.
Thank
then
you.
You coming on the same wavelength. If you want to give a sweetener, you can give 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
Maybe we can take another question. There's a question from Mr. Santhan Kelat. The question is, how will key issues like high upfront cost, charging gaps, battery import dependence, range anxiety be addressed? I don't know whether he's really understood the topic of our discussion, but any answers?
So, when I think the question is more related to electric vehicles.
Yes, so I think so.
Today that's beyond the scope, because electric penetration vehicles is growing. Actually, a very interesting trend has happened. The moment this West Asia crisis came in, the penetration of electric four-wheelers have gone up. And the month of April has had the all-time highest virtually retails of electric cars, which is 23,000, and even two-wheelers has been 150,000. So I think that concern is being taken care, but it doesn't link back to the point as far as E20 is concerned or the mix is concerned.
Right. Maybe last question. This is from Khalid Answer from Business Standard. Will E25 be an option or the next default? And with rising ethanol pricing, is the cost pitch losing its credibility?
Puneet, you can answer it.
Sure, sir. So E25 obviously will be default. I think there is no discussion around that. But then, going forward, obviously it gives us scope because right now, India crude basket, I think if we see yesterday was around 115 US dollars. And going forward, maybe towards the year end, it may actually increase. Obviously, if this crisis keeps on continuing. So primarily, this gives a kind of a cushion to the government, to actually makes ethanol, with the fuel and, stay away from, exceptionally high prices because otherwise the fuel prices can touch, 130, 40. And just to put that in contrast, right? So just in January, the Indian crude basket was just around $65. And today, if you see yesterday's number also declared by government, so that is 114, right? So clearly the fuel prices have already doubled for government of India, right? And government is right now taking that impact. So if further goes, then obviously all that has to be passed on to the consumer, and ethanol can provide some good cushion, to the government. So I think E25 would be default, and even going forward, maybe, but then beyond that, it has to be FFP. So you have to provide ethanol dispensing station separate and gasoline separate, and the mix can be decided by the consumer depending upon the gain he gets driving more ethanol or more gasoline, depending upon his choice.
Right. We thanks. Shohini, is there a question? Last question.
Yeah,
Shohini.
can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Shohini also covers the auto sector. She is based in Mumbai. Yes, Shohini, go ahead.
I was wondering that if there is an inherent contradiction, which, see, ethanol, as we captured during the conversation, has less volumetric energy, or energy density than pure gasoline. So obviously, we would need more fuel volume to deliver the same energy output. So is this a contradiction to our, definitive push towards CAFE 3? Because how do automakers, my question will be for Arun, reconcile this, because the mandated fuel itself may lower the kilometer per liter unless engines are, very specifically calibrated for higher ethanol blends. While some manufacturers have done that for their new cars, but I don't think everyone is at par, or we can take in higher ethanol blending right at the moment. What do you think?
So,
Right.
when we look at CAFE 3, it is talking of various fuels. It's talking of petrol, it's talking of diesel, it's talking of CNG, it's talking of electric, and it also mentions flex fuels, although we don't have flex fuels. So there are certain super bonus points being put in the CAFE norms. The bonus points may be 4 for electric, 3 for 2 for hybrid. So that it's a question which is more and above the question which you asked of. So it will be impacted more by those factors. But I think a bigger concern, which I think to my mind arises, is if the customer believes that the fuel efficiency goes down and diesel is the more fuel efficient, and we want to actually discourage diesel. Actually, after the last GST also changes, diesel's proportion on Indian automobile has not gone down. Diesel, in passenger vehicles has gone up from 18 to 20%. And the second part, which you mentioned on how to look at the entire thing, it's a contradiction. Well, that I think more study is required. It's difficult to pass a judgment at this point of time, but everybody will be on the same level playing field. Suppose the fuel dispensing is 25, then whether it's a bigger vehicle or a smaller vehicle, petrol, they are on the same level playing field. So it will balance out to that extent between manufacturers.
Thank you. Yeah, we could go on and on because it's a deadly combination, automobile and fuel, but we've completely run out of run out of time. And Thank you. Thank you for being here and speaking to us. We had begun with a question mark, E25, a hurdle for automakers, but I don't think there is any need for that question mark because we know that there are huge concerns and it is going to be a hurdle not just for automakers but for consumers as well. Thank you all for this. Pricing, testing, clarity, long-range planning. These are the issues that we discussed. And thanks again. And see you all next week with another exciting subject in Business Standard Dialogue. Thank you. Thank you so much.